Hey team, how you doing? I'm wearing my very sexy headphones today because whenever I am wearing my headphones, I tend not to shout into the microphone, which makes a much better sound quality. And the reason why I'm wearing my headphones is because I'm actually going to put this episode out or this masterclass out as a podcast episode. So some of you will be listening to this on the podcast. Welcome. This is amazing, but I love that you listen to these podcasts. But this episode is actually being recorded as part of the new 4-week shredded body challenge. And the reason why I wanted to record this episode for the podcast and as part of the challenge was for a couple of reasons. First one is it's a productivity hack. I have to record a podcast every week, but also I really want to help the new members in the 4-week shredded body challenge who have invested in themselves and invested in me, and I really want to help them move forward. So the more mindset content that I can give in the group, the more likely these women are to have a real chance of success with this program, because it really is a no-fail program. So for those listening on the podcast, welcome. I hope you get a lot out of this. For those of you who are here in the 4-week shredded body challenge, I hope you're going to get even more out of this, because all of the content I'm going to teach today is really directly for you guys. It's as a direct result of the struggles that I have seen you posting in the groups that I really want you to help you overcome, I guess. And so what today's episode is called is why do I give up before the end? I've seen this so many times in the group. We only opened the group there on Friday. I'm actually recording this on Sunday, the 10th of September, which is when I normally record the podcast. I either come into the office extremely early in the morning to do it, or I come in on a Sunday and do it. My poor husband never sees me. So I came into the office to record it because I just kept seeing in the groups so many women saying, this time I'm not going to give up, or loads of people wanting to join the challenge. Like we just ran a 5-day challenge, a free 5-day fitness mindset motivation challenge. And there's so many women in that group want to join the program, but the program is a higher cost than the rest of our shreds. It's $497. We do have payment plans, of course, for those of you who are maybe considering joining this next week before the cart closes on the 16th of September. But it is a higher cost, and I understand that it is a huge investment, especially with the exchange rate at the minute to Australian dollars, New Zealand dollars, and also to Canadian dollars. So there's a lot of women are, suffering FOMO, of course, and want to join, but then they're also saying, the reason why, the thing that's holding me back is I have bought, Buns and Guns, and I bought Butt Camp, and I bought Extreme Body Makeover, and I bought all these programs from Kim, and I get to a certain point in the program, and then I just stop. Like I give up. And I don't know why I give up, and I don't want to give up. I don't want to invest this money and give up again. So I'm just feeling really on the fence. And I guess what these women are wanting me to come in and say, or swoop in and say, is, give them, I guess, some kind of life advice or some kind of magic pill to say, I won't let you fail this time, And of course I do say that when it's appropriate, but the reality of it is I can't be in everyone's home with them. I can't be in anyone's home with them. I can't be in the gym with people. I can't be there in the morning. Like, now, if I could be in your home in the morning, like waking you up and getting you out of bed like I do with my kids, then I think everyone would succeed, but I can't obviously be there doing that. And so the only thing that I can do is try to give you an understanding from my perspective as to why you are giving up, and also give you some examples of the times when I used to give up and then I overcame it, because obviously I'm not perfect, but I have gone on to achieve quite a lot in my life, and I really want to try and pass those secrets and hacks on to you guys. So why do we give up before the end of something? Well, let me start with a story. I remember when I was working for my mum's company. Our family business isn't my mum's company. It was actually my aunt and uncle started a family business called Minprint, and it's a very well-known printing company here in Belfast. It's actually called Mad Creative now. Minprint. No, what is it? What does it stand for? Something and design. Mad Color. Oh my God, I can't even think. Anyway, my family will kill me if I don't know what it stands for. But so anyway, the business is very successful. My aunt and uncle started it. And then years later, my mum went to work for them. And then she and two other directors ended up buying my aunt and uncle out. So they owned the company. There was four directors, my cousin, Jamie, my mum, and then two others. And so I actually, at the time, then went to work for the company as a sales rep. I was always very good at sales. And so, but I then became, I was going to say involved. I got involved with, or I met a woman who's a very good friend of mine now, and I actually met her in Dublin Horse Show, and she was working with a company, a human development, a personal development company in America, which did a lot of NLP programs and different, programs that were very similar to that, different teachings, which is why I guess a lot of what I teach comes from the philosophies that I learned, with that company. And so she invited me to go to America and take one of these training programs. And so I thought it was amazing because it was all about personal development. I was totally into personal development. And so I flew to America to take one of the training programs. Anyway, I loved it so much, I ended up deciding to run the training programs as a business in Belfast. I would enroll people, I would bring over the coaches and the head trainers, whatever, and I would run these training programs. And I hadn't really worked for the family business for very long. At the time, I guess it was probably only, I would say maybe 18 months. And so I remember coming home and, biting the bullet and handing in my notice and saying to my mum, I'm going to start this as a business. And my mum's always been super supportive of me in everything that I've done. And I remember her saying, that's fine. Okay. I would obviously prefer you stay here and work for the company, but whatever you need to do is fine. And I remember everything I did, I always started with an enormous amount of enthusiasm, right? Always with an enormous amount of enthusiasm. I am a very enthusiastic person, as you have probably figured out by now, and I'm a very motivated person. And so whenever I took on something new, no matter what it was, whether it was a new diet or a new fitness regime or a new yoga practice or whatever I do in life, I do it with passion and with purpose and with drive. But as is usual for people who have a lot of passion and purpose and drive, once the passion and purpose and drive dries up or leaves us or isn't just as strong or as prevalent anymore, what we tend to do then is we tend to move on to the next thing looking for the passion, purpose, and drive again. And this had obviously been a pattern that I had run through my entire life. I think at this point I was about 24. I think I was 24 or 25, maybe 24, 25. And I remember my aunt saying to me, my mum's sister, and they worked together, they shared an office in Minprint. And I remember her saying to me at the time, not in an unkind way in any way, but she said to me, whenever I said I was leaving, she was like, oh dear, okay, well, that's fine. And I remember saying, you know what, Kim, if only, she shook her head, she said, if only you could stick at something, you would be so successful. And I remember going, yeah, oh yeah, you're right, yeah. And I remember thinking, bitch, like, fucking bitch, like, how dare she say that to me? If only you could stick at something. I can stick at things. I stick at loads of things. But I remember it really stung, right? And something only stings you if it's true. If there's no truth at all in something that someone says to you, then you aren't going to care. You're not going to be bothered in the slightest. Like I always say to people, if I said to you, you have purple hair and green skin with yellow spots and you arrived, you landed half an hour ago in your back garden in a spaceship, and I was emphatic that this was the case, like, would you care? You'd be like, yeah, okay, Kim, like, whatever. Whenever a little kid like calls you a name or something, they're like, I hate you, you're just a big meanie old meanie. And you go, oh, bless. And you don't go, oh, bitch, like, how dare she say that to me? Like I'm deeply offended. Or I don't know, maybe you do, but normally whenever little kids call us names, we see it for what it is. They don't know what they're saying. You're not really a bitch, or they don't call you a bitch, they call you meanie old meanie or whatever. You don't take it personally, right? And you don't take it personally because you don't place any truth in it. But whenever someone says something to you that you have an emotional reaction to, or you feel angry about or defensive about, it's usually because there's truth in it. Of course, I didn't know this at the time because I wasn't that self-aware or well-developed emotionally as I am today. I didn't have the experience that I have today. And so, but the harsh truth is, right, that at the time, it was exact what she was saying was absolutely 100% true. Like, I had never stuck at anything in the long term. And I mean, now fair enough, I was young, I was only 25, but I mean boyfriends, jobs, fitness regimes, like horses, anything I had ever done in my life, I had done to the point of doing it very well, but I had never, ever transferred over into excellence. And many people in the world are like this. They do something really, really well, or, very well, or really well. But in order to move over into expert status, if you like, to move over into, there's a word for it, and I can't think what it is, mastery. In order to move into mastery, you have to develop something else, because talent will only take you so far. But I had never moved into complete mastery of anything, partly because I was young, but partly because I had this thing that I didn't even know that I had, that caused me to give up and move on before I ever reached mastery. I've written here my notes. I had never, the harsh truth is, looking back, I had never developed the skill of pushing through, because motivation will get you going, but discipline will keep you going. And I didn't understand that at the time. Now, my aunt, who I love dearly, by the way, had built a very successful business. She and her husband had built a highly successful, highly profitable business. She understood what it took to be successful in a way that, of course, I never, ever had. And many of you will not understand, because you've never actually pushed through to mastery. And the reason I can say this confidently, I guess, is because mastery is not situation dependent. So it's not that, like, if you are the kind of person who can master something, you can master anything, because developing the skill set and the emotional fortitude that it takes to develop mastery, once you've developed that, you can apply it to anything. It's not situation dependent. It's not like you can be absolutely incredible at fitness, but you could never be successful in business. It's not that you could be incredible in business, but never be successful in business. If you, whatever skill set you have applied to be successful in one can be applied to the other. And now my talent had carried me quite far in life. I had been successful in many things. Like, up until that point when I was 25, I had been a sales rep. I had been a marketing executive. I've been sales rep several times, actually. I had been a restaurant manager. I had ridden horses to a reasonably high level, but not to international level. I had had many boyfriends. I had, successful relationships. I had taken up running. I had got to the point where I'd run 30 miles a week consistently, but I'd never run a marathon. I had trained in the gym with a power lifter, but I'd never really achieved incredible things with my body. So I had tried loads and loads and loads of things, but I had never really pushed through to mastery. But to be truly successful, you really have to develop the skill of pushing through. You have to develop the skill of pushing through. And this is one of the many things, this is the main thing that many of you who cannot push through to the end, who can't see a program through to the end, or a fitness journey through to the end. This is one of the major things that you're missing, this skill. Now, could be many other things that you're missing. And of course, I'm going to help you with those over this next 6 weeks of the 4-week Shredded Body program. And of course, here on the podcast as well. But this one skill, if you can learn this, it really will be transformational. And I'll tell you when it all changed for me, when I began to really develop a deep sense of awareness, but also when I developed the skill of pushing through. And it was when I joined an international women's group. So whenever I decided that I wanted to be successful in business, it was just after Jack was born. Many of you will know the story. I had 4 kids. I was just drowning underneath the weight of 4 children under the age of 5. And I decided that the only way, no one was coming to save me, and I was going to have to simply save myself. And so I decided that I was going to start my own business. And I one of the things I did whenever I started my own business was I found a woman's business group, if you like, to join. It was more like an accountability group. So my friend who had introduced me to the company in America where I went into the training programs, she actually introduced me to this group. She said she had goals and things she was working on. And she said, I know you're working on starting this business, Kim. So what about would you like to join this accountability group that I've started? And I said, absolutely, I would love to. So she'd put together a group of her friends in this accountability group. Now, the accountability group I think we started off with 6 members. And then we went down to 5 members, as far as I know. Now, one of them, my friend who started the group, I think she was living in France at the time. We had another member who was living in New York. We had another member who was living in South America, in Colombia. I think it was Colombia, yes. And then we had me living in Belfast. We had another member in America or upstate New York. And I think then we had someone else in the Middle East. So when we called ourselves the women of the world, because we were the women of the world. And we committed that we were going to meet, I think it was every Wednesday at 1 p.m. UK time, which was, I think, 8 a.m. and whatever time zone it was, or 2 p.m. UK time, which would have been 9 a.m. in Eastern, and it would have been, I don't know, whatever different times in different time zones. But whatever this time was, this was the time that we all agreed would work for all of us. And so the first week we were all excited and we all showed up for the meeting, and we had set ourselves, some questions and things that we were going to answer every single week. And each person was going to, work on their goals for the next week. And then we were going to discuss, how far we'd moved and where we were limited and all these different things. So it was really a goal setting program. And the first week we showed up all excited. And then the next week, I think 5 of us showed up because someone else couldn't make it. And then the next week, I think 4 showed up. And then the next week, 2 showed up, and then the next week maybe I couldn't make it, and so every week we realized after about 2 months of meeting maybe that we hadn't had all 6 women together for one session bar the first session. Somebody always cried off to one session. And one of the members of the group was very wise, and she was actually part of another accountability group. And she came to the group and she said, guys, I have an idea. But actually then one of the members left. She realized that she just couldn't. She said, I thought I was going to be able to make this work and I just can't. So she left the group. And so we were down to 5. So we had this other member come to us and she said, I'm actually part of another accountability group and for a different goal. And there's something we've decided to implement in this other group, because as women, one of our biggest limitations is that we can't show up for ourselves. Men have a different code of conduct. It doesn't mean they're superior not by any stretch of the imagination, but they are superior at one thing. And men are definitely superior at showing up for themselves. They always say, and this always made me laugh, not laugh because it's very serious, but the reason why terrorist organizations exist is because they're run by men. Men show up every week and they do the thing that they're supposed to do, whereas women don't. We let ourselves off the hook. If terrorist organizations were run by women, they would, all show up all gung-ho the first week, and then it would be, oh, I can't, I'm washing my hair, or I can't because I've got this other thing on, or I was just too tired, or whatever. Women as a race tend to be flaky. And the reason why we're flaky, it's not our fault. It's because whenever we're kids, we're not taught accountability in the same way that boys are. We're let off the hook. Part of the reason we're let off the hook is because we get emotional. Whenever we cry, people don't know what to do about it. Remember, I don't know whether I've been teaching here or in loads of different teachings I've been doing. The reason why we let people off the hook for crying is because when people cry, it makes us uncomfortable. So we want them to stop doing what they're doing so we can stop feeling uncomfortable. So whenever little girls cry, it triggers the adults, and then they just want to let the little girl off the hook because they want her to stop crying. So we quite often give her what she wants, or we say she doesn't have to do the thing or whatever, because we don't want to feel uncomfortable anymore. But all we do whenever we teach kids this, whenever we teach them that crying gets them out of what they want or what they're supposed to do or the right thing to do, we just basically teach them that they can use their emotions to get out of being held accountable. It's one of the worst lessons you can teach kids. By all means, let them, sit down and talk to them about the thing, but don't let them off the hook because they're crying. So with my kids, anytime they ever cried, to get off something, I never, ever, ever let them off the hook. I would have said, you still go to your tennis lesson and we'll talk about tennis later. If you're absolutely dead set that you don't want to do tennis anymore, I'm more than happy to talk about it. But I'm sorry, you're not going to not go now just because you're tired. So my son Jack actually developed, just as a wee side note, he actually developed a thing recently. Lorraine, my housekeeper, is so badly triggered by kids crying. And so a couple of times recently when Jack was supposed to go to tennis or whatever, he hadn't gone to bed early enough and she had to get him up and get him out the door to his lessons. And he cried once. He was like, just cried and cried, said he didn't want to go. So she let him off the hook with going. And he was like, now Jack is 11. But he realized that he could cry and get out of going to tennis until one day I was home. It was so funny. This is how adults are triggered. This is a total side note, by the way. I came home and came into the house and I could hear Jack, he was wailing upstairs. And Lorraine was like, Jack, and she was talking to him. And I came into the house and Ryan came down the stairs. And Ryan was like, obviously, because crying really triggers him. And so he was like, I don't know what the hell's going on. You need to talk to that child. And Lorraine was like, whatever. And everyone was, I came into the house. And I was like, oh my God. I just looked around and I started to laugh. I was like, this is what happens when children cry. Adults get like, if they're triggered by it, if they were punished for crying as a child or punished for making a lot of noise or whatever, which Ryan was, I'm not sure about Lorraine, but certainly they had a very negative link with crying. So anyway, I said, Jack, come downstairs, please. And Jack came down. I said, what are you crying for? And he said, I don't want to go to tennis. I'm tired. And I said, well, tired is just a body feeling. And quite often when you get there, you'll have a state change. I said, so I'm more than happy to talk about your tennis, but I much rather would talk about your sleep schedule and why you're tired in the morning because you're choosing to go to bed late, which is having a knock-on effect. And I'm not going to not send you to tennis because I still have to pay. So I'm sorry that you're tired. Let me give you a hug. And I gave him a big hug. And I was really kind with it. And I was giving him a big hug. And I said, sorry, mate, but crying doesn't get you off the hook. Get your shoes on out the door. And I sent him out the door. And you know what? He never cried about going to tennis again because he just made sure that he got to bed early. It took one session for me to go, this does not work and send him out the door for the whole thing to be completely transformed. So that was just a wee side story. Now I have to try and remember what I was talking about. Oh, yeah, back to my original story. So we were in this group and the women weren't showing up every week. And my friend came in, she said, I'm doing this thing in another group where she said, I want to make sure we're all getting the most out of this, but I want to develop the skill of showing up every week. I want to build my inner word to myself. So would you guys be willing to do this with me? And here's what we're going to do. She said, every week we show up. She said, we have to be here. The meeting starts at 2 p.m. And she said, but anyone who wants social time, because, we had things that we discussed and we worked on our goals and things. So she said, anyone who wants social time can arrive from 1:45. So 1:45 to 2 p.m. is social time. Then at 2 p.m., the meeting starts. And she said, so here are the rules. If someone can't make it to the meeting, they have to reschedule the meeting for everybody. So you're not allowed to not show up. That is not an option. If you know that you can't make the meeting in advance, you have to reschedule the meeting for everybody. And so we were like, oh, wow, because these are very busy women with very busy schedules on loads of different time zones. So that was the first rule. And she was proposing this to see would we all agree to it. The second rule was if you are late to the meeting, as soon as the meeting starts at 2, if not everybody is there, a timer will start. And everybody in the meeting will sit in silence until the other person arrives. So let's say you are 4 minutes late to the meeting. Let's say I'm 4 minutes late to the meeting. Well, the other members would sit in silence for 4 minutes. And then once I arrived to the meeting, we would all sit in silence together for an additional 4 minutes, which means that 8 minutes of very valuable time for everybody there would be wasted because this time was truly valuable for other people. And so I was a bit like, wow, like this is a commitment. Like I really then had to look at myself and say, am I willing to commit to this? Because the incredible thing that happens whenever you make a commitment like this is you suddenly become aware of how much your actions affect other people in a way that you have never been aware of before. And there was a couple of times that I had to try to reschedule the meeting or other people had to try to reschedule the meeting and because they couldn't make it. And let me tell you, pretty soon we realized that trying to coordinate 5 different people's schedules and confirm times with them and confirm meeting links with them and get everybody on the same page, it was painful. And so I think I maybe attempted to do it once and then realized this was far, far too difficult. So I just made sure that every Wednesday there was nothing else planned. And I mean nothing. Like if I was on vacation, if I was planning a vacation, I would say to Ryan, oh, well, don't forget I have my meeting at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. So wherever I am, I need to make sure that I have Wi-Fi at that point. Like there was no lunches on that day. There was nothing we were organizing. It was, I had to make sure that, I knew where I was going to be every single Wednesday at 2 p.m. And a couple of times, people were late and there was once that we had I'll never forget this. I think this was the only time I was ever late. We had daylight savings. I hadn't accounted for daylight savings. And so daylight savings in America and the UK are never normally the same time. And I remember being in a coffee shop having coffee with a friend, and I was watching the time because I knew I had to be home for the meeting in whatever 40 minutes or something, or I don't know, 10 minutes. Yes, whatever I was having coffee. I think it must have been like 10 past 1. And I got it wouldn't have been 10 past 1. It would have been just after 1. Somebody would have messaged me, but say about 5 past 1. Somebody messaged me and said, hi, honey, are you coming to the meeting? And I was like, the meeting? What do you mean the meeting? The meeting isn't for another hour. They were like, no, the meeting is now. And I realized that they had had daylight savings and I hadn't even accounted for this. And I was like, fuck, shit. And I said to my friend, I'm so sorry, I have to go. Because I knew that these women were sitting in silence waiting for me. And if I chose not to go, it wasn't even an option to say, oh, I'm so sorry, I can't make it to the meeting, because they would have sat in silence for a full hour. Those were the rules that I had agreed to. They wouldn't have said, oh, well, Kim can't make it, we'll just go on with her. They would have sat in silence for a full hour had I not made the meeting. And I said, I'll be there as soon as I can. And I jumped in the car and I bombed home. I was only about 8 minutes from home. I bombed home. And I think I got onto the meeting at about maybe 20 past. And I come in, I was like, guys, I'm so sorry. And they're like, shh, it's okay. And so everyone was sitting in silence. And the rule as well was you weren't allowed to distract yourself. You weren't allowed to be on your computer. You weren't allowed to be on your phone. You weren't allowed to do anything. You just had to sit there in silence, looking at each other on Zoom. And those 20 minutes that I sat there in silence, knowing these women had been there for 20 minutes already, and they were now 20 minutes more in silence, we wasted 40 minutes of the meeting, of the very valuable time of these women, because I had been 20 minutes late. Now you could say, oh, but Kim, it wasn't your fault. You didn't know about daylight savings. It's my job to know about daylight savings. If my actions are going to affect women that I have made a commitment with, well, then it's my job to go online and say, when are daylight savings? And let me tell you, see, from that moment on, I have daylight savings in my calendar forever, because it affects our company as well now. It's always something I think about because it really affected me that day. So I had to sit in silence for another 20 minutes. And let me tell you, I was never, ever late again. Now, other women were late and we had to sit in silence. And during those times, you did sit there going, this is a complete waste of my time. There are so many other things I could be doing. I had 4 young kids at the time. I had to arrange childcare to be at these meetings. Like it was, there was a cost financially, emotionally, and physically to me being in these meetings and to all these women being in the meetings. And when people were late, you did have a moment of, fuck's sake, could you not have been on time? But let me tell you, no one was ever late more than once or twice, and never normally by more than a few minutes. And you didn't have to, so there was no punishment. Like no one was annoyed with you or angry with you because we'd all done it before. The sitting in silence was enough of a self-imposed uncomfortable consequence of being late that you never had to be punished. I think a lot of us make decisions in life because we are scared of the consequences, right? We show up on time because we're scared we'll get punished if we don't show up on time. Something completely different happens when you show up, because if you don't, you will have to sit in the consequences. The consequences are not anger or punishment or fear from other people. The consequence is you have to sit there and look at people's time that you have wasted. And you have to sit there and look at them and then say, I'm sorry at the end of it, and then go through the rest of the meeting realizing that you've wasted 40 minutes of their time and they only have 20 minutes left. I think I was only late once in my entire time, maybe twice. And the second time was like 2 minutes or something. So what is the whole point about this? Well, for the first time in my life, I had developed the skill of commitment, showing up when I said I was going to show up and building my inner word to myself. Because honestly, before that time, I would have been probably like you listening to this, or you in the group, in the 4-week shredded body group. I would guess that no one else, and tell me if I'm wrong, right? Either write it on the podcast or leave it in the comments. Tell me if I'm wrong. Have any of you ever experienced anything like what I've just described, where you are part of a group of supportive, loving women working for the same goal, where you have a consequence which is so real that you have agreed to, that smacks you in the face whenever you break your word? I would guess probably not. But let me tell you, it was the singularly most powerful thing I have ever participated in terms of moving me forward towards my goals. My husband used to tell people about it all the time, because Ryan is a very disciplined person. He is the kind of person who shows up when he says he's going to show up and does what he says he's going to do. He detests people who are late, but he has a lot of rules about it, okay? There's a difference between something being an ethic and a rule. When it's an ethic, you show up on time because it's the right thing to do. When it's a rule, you show up on time out of fear of being punished, or fear of being seen as a kind of late person or whatever. And Ryan used to tell everybody about this meeting that Kim was part of, because he genuinely couldn't believe that we had created this self-imposed rule for ourselves. And he couldn't believe that everybody showed up every week and actually managed to follow through. And so it was the thing that absolutely and utterly transformed me, because if you cannot believe your own inner word, if you can't believe the promises that you make to yourself, you have nothing. Nothing. You're lying to yourself. Like, whenever you think about it in that way, does it not make you laugh a little bit? Like, imagine how insane it is that we lie to ourselves. And I want you to ask yourself, how many times have you promised that you are going to do something and then you haven't done it? Or how many times have you, worse actually, how many times have you made a promise to yourself that you're going to do something, and as you made the promise to yourself, you know that you might not do it. You leave it open. You're like, I'm 80% sure I'm going to do this, but if I don't really feel like it in the morning, then I won't. How many times? So why do we pretend? Why do we pretend to ourselves? I had this conversation with a girl in the group the other week, and she said, I don't know what it is. I just can't, I woke up this morning and my alarm went off, and I don't know why I did this, but I just chose to go back to sleep. I just turned my alarm off and went back to sleep. And she goes, I just can't get up in the morning. And I said, no, stop lying to yourself. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, of course you can get up in the morning. You're choosing not to. She goes, no, but like, if I was choosing not to, then I would just choose to do it. I just can't. And I said, well, is there like something outside of yourself? Like, is your duvet physically entrapping you in the bed? And she laughed and she said, no, of course not. And I said, it's not that you can't. I said, let me ask you, have you ever had to get up for a flight to go on vacation? She was like, of course. And I said, have you ever had to get up for a very early flight? Like, maybe you had to get out of bed at like 4 a.m. She was like, yes, of course. And I said, did you get out of bed at 4 a.m. and make the flight? She was like, yes. And I said, why did you choose to get out of bed that time? And she said, well, because I guess I wanted to go on vacation, and I wouldn't want to miss the flight, because if I missed the flight, then I would have missed the vacation and I would have been out financially. And I said, right. So there was a downside, a very real downside to not getting out of bed. So you chose to get out of bed, and also you were excited about it. You wanted to do it. And no matter how difficult it was, you did it. She was like, okay, that's very true. And this is the problem, right? We don't have enough of a downside for ourselves whenever we don't show up and achieve our goals. But part of this women's group I was part of, there was an enormous downside if I did not show up, which was I had to sit in silence for double the time that, or the same amount of time again that it took me to arrive. And because the consequence was very real and slapped me up the face, I never did not show up. And I've written here in my notes, how many times have you promised you'll do something and then not done it? So why do we pretend? Or I said, and worse, you've known when you made the promise that you might not. Why do we pretend? Well, you may consider yourself an honest person, but you're not. You're a liar. You're a big, fat liar, pants on fire. I hate to tell you. And so am I, by the way. So I'm not judging you. We're all big, fat liar, pants on fire. And it's not your fault. I'm going to tell you why. But I said here, if you lie to yourself, you have nothing. You have nothing if you lie to yourself, if you can't even keep your own inner word to yourself. But why do we lie to ourselves? Well, we learn to lie when we are little kids through fear, okay? But a lie we tell to ourselves is a whole other level of deceit. So why do we lie to ourselves? Well, it's because of something called disintegration. When we are kids, our parents teach us about good and bad and right and wrong, but it's not always logical. It's based on their rules, which are subjective rather than objective. So we don't really have an objective definition of good and bad. And it's sometimes very hard to have an objective definition of good and bad, but I think that if we had one as a human race, we would be in a completely different place in humanity. In our groups, sometimes people get offended because we remove posts. And sometimes the coaches struggle with, should I remove this post or should I not? Is this thing good or is this thing bad? Is this comment good or is this comment bad? And they don't always know the answer. And so I've taught them to ask themselves the question, what would happen if everyone did this thing? So this thing that I'm trying to determine is good or bad, what would happen if everyone did it? Would it be good or would it be bad? And that always gives them the answer, because something can seem harmless sometimes. Like in one of our shred groups, maybe someone posts a picture of some beautiful cupcakes that they have made for their school fair, and they're not on the shred, right? And they're like, oh my God, look at these delicious cupcakes. I really wish I could eat one. And the coaches are like, oh, do we really want to have, it's not really pertaining to the shred. It's nothing to do with the shred. The food isn't on the shred. It's not a question about the shred. They just want to share these, the glory of these cupcakes that they made. And the coaches will be like, should I remove this or should I not? And I'll always say, well, what would happen if every single person posted a picture of cupcakes? Would it be good or bad? And the coaches go, well, that would be bad. And I say, okay, so there's your answer. Whereas on the other hand, say someone posted a picture of their progress, their before and after progress. Well, what would happen if every single person posted a picture of their before and after progress? Would that be good or bad? Well, that would be good, because that's them taking, being accountable and sharing their progress in the group and showing up and showing they're working the program. So anytime you ever want to ask yourself, is this thing good or is this thing bad? Just ask yourself the question, and it can be applied to anything. What would happen if every single person in the world or in this community did this? And that will usually give you the answer. But whenever we're younger, our parents don't teach us these objective terms of, or objective understandings or definitions of good and bad, because they don't have them. And they don't have them because they too are disintegrated. They act a lot on fear rather than on data. And that's the biggest shift I'm trying to give you guys here in the 4-week shredded body group. And in the mindset challenge, I'm trying to shift you away from making decisions based on fear and acting based on fear to acting based on data. I'm trying to move you all to be scientists, right? Rather than fearful human beings. But whenever we're kids, we don't always learn the best lessons. And the worst thing that you can ever do for a child is to punish them. Punish them either by spanking, like the extreme of this would be spanking, shouting, yelling. Any of those things would be the extreme version of punishment. The less extreme version of punishment that sometimes we don't even want to recognize as punishment is shaming a child, or commenting negatively on their body or their weight, or commenting negatively on something that they love. Like if they love computer games and you're like, oh, you're just so obsessed with computers. Well, you're punishing them because them loving computers triggers you in some way. So that's punishment. Anytime we ever feel the urge to comment negatively or a joke with a jag or barb someone, that's punishment. Worst thing you can ever do for a small child is to punish them, because you basically build them a world of walls and a world of rules. And you also teach them some lessons which are really not valuable lessons for moving into adulthood. And one particular story that came to mind whenever I was thinking about this, or thinking about what I was going to teach here, was whenever I was young, I remember playing with my sisters on our landing upstairs. So the landing, in between all the bedrooms, was where we used to play and do somersaults and all that. It was quite a long one. So we used to do somersaults and cartwheels and all different stuff along the landing, as you do when you're young. And my mum had this vase. So she had this dresser at the end of the landing, and she had this ceramic vase on it, which I think was an antique. And there was one day that I was somersaulting or doing something, and I knocked the vase over and it broke. Now, it broke quite cleanly. I don't think it broke in two. I think one bit broke off the top of it and it broke cleanly. And I was like, oh my God. Like, and of course, I had already learned that breaking things was bad. And why was it bad? Because my parents or my dad had an emotional reaction when things were broken. So I had already learned to avoid stuff like that and to not own up to things, because if you owned up to things, it was a negative consequence, right? When you punish children for making mistakes, you literally teach them to be liars. So that's why most of us are liars, because we were punished when we were younger for failure and for making mistakes. So we learned making mistakes and failure is bad, because there's a negative consequence, which is we get punished by the people who are supposed to be loving and protecting us. You can see now why we're all so fucked up, can't you? So this particular day I broke this vase, and so I just decided to set the bit on the top of the vase that was broken, right? And to me, it looked absolutely perfect through my 5-year-old eyes. I thought, well, that's perfect. No one's going to notice. So of course, my dad, old Eagle Eye, did notice immediately. He came into the house later, and he came downstairs with a broken vase in his hand, and my two sisters and I were in the kitchen, and I remember him saying, who broke the vase? And we were all like, I don't know. It wasn't me. I can't remember if Carol and Carrie did know it was me and they were protecting me, or whether I did it. And can't remember. But anyway, I remember Dad saying to me, Kimmy, did you break the vase? And I said, no, I didn't. And he said, are you sure? And I must have looked, a bit squirmy or suspicious. Whenever you're kids, you don't realize that your parents know all these signs, of course. So I must have looked suspicious. And so he said, are you sure you didn't break the vase? And I said, no, I didn't. I promise it wasn't me. And he said, are you sure? And I said, no, absolutely not. Wasn't me. And he said, I promise if it was you and you tell me the truth, I promise I won't be cross. And I remember looking at him and thinking, do I believe him? I wasn't sure. I'd obviously already established that my father was a liar. So I was like, I wonder, do I believe him? And so he said it again. I promise, just tell me. I promise. He put on this whole act of being my friend. I promise. I won't be mad. Just tell me the truth. So I decided to take the risk and trust him. And I said, okay, it was me. I did break the vase. And what did he do? Well, fuck me, he went nuts. The very thing that he promised he wouldn't do, he did. And he said, and I can't remember what happened, but he started shouting and he said, I can't believe you lied to me and you should always tell the truth. And I can't believe you were so careless. And he spanked me, I think. And he was like, you're a bad girl and you go to your room. And so the very thing that he promised would not happen, happened in the extreme, right? And what did I learn, right? In that moment, what did I learn? I learned you never tell the fucking truth. Never tell the truth, because the truth hurts, and it does not hurt in a good way. Now, this kind of belief that I developed was more like a postulate. Okay. So a postulate is a belief that we build when we're children. Now, of course, I did not build the belief that you should lie everywhere about everything. In that moment, I built the postulate that if you break something, or if you cause damage in some way, you must never, ever, ever own up to causing the damage. Because if you own up to causing the damage, you will get severely punished. So whenever we punish children, they build postulates of behavior. So in this circumstance, you never do this, or in this circumstance, you do this. So if you stole something when you were younger and you got away with it, you would have built a postulate that you can steal in this instance and not get caught. So what if that instance ever arrives in future, you may steal because you believe you won't get caught. Or if you stole something when you were younger and you did get caught, you will build a postulate that for the rest of your life that you should never, ever steal in this particular instance because you will get caught. That's why I'm very big on holding my kids accountable to everything. And if I ever knew my kids were lying, or if they were a bit like, no, I didn't do that, I would always have said, whenever I was younger, I remember I lied about this thing, or I lied to protect myself because I was scared and I thought mommy might be mad or whatever. But then I learned that this, that. So I'll sit down and I'll build rapport with them, and I'll be like, and they'll be like, oh, and then I'm like, are you sure you're telling the truth? And then they always would have gone, no, mommy, no, I'm not telling the truth. I did do that thing. And I'd say, oh, well done for telling me. Well done for being honest. And I always built the postulates in my children that telling the truth never has a negative consequence. And in fact, if you don't tell the truth, there's a negative consequence. So I would have held them very accountable, never with punishment or fear or shame, but with consequences to not telling the truth. So if my dad had been more aware of how he was negatively affecting me, I think he would have acted differently. But the thing about it is, whenever you start learning this information that I'm teaching, a lot of people start to get angry at their parents, right? And oh, my parents, and then it brings up all these memories where they were punished and shamed and all of these negative memories. And people get very angry and very upset, and they say, my parents should have done this, and my dad was always punishing me, and he was religious, and this happened to me and that happened to me, and they start to victimize themselves. But you're not a victim, because you grew up and you moved out of the house. You were only limited or having to live with limitations for a short amount of time. And once you grew up, you moved out of the house, you could choose differently. And you may still be looking after your parents who were mean to you when you were younger, but that's only out of obligation. It's not because they're now enslaving you. It's just because you've chosen the easiest path. They've trained you to fear their anger and disapproval. So you continue to choose that as an adult because you fear their anger and disapproval. It doesn't mean you're enslaved by them. So if my dad had been more self-aware, which he wasn't, I could have built different postulates when I was younger. But here's the thing. My dad was very well intended. And I just want to say this as a side note before we move on. His intent was good. My parents' intent was good. My dad wanted to teach me to be a good person, to be a person that does not lie, to be a person that does not steal, to be a person that builds value in the world. And I'm doing okay. Like, they did a pretty good job. But unfortunately, our parents don't know any other way. And I'm sure everyone listening to this or watching this has punished their kids or punished their husband or punished someone at some point. And the reason why we punish is so that we can inflict emotional or physical pain on someone in order to change their behavior. But the reason we want to punish someone is because their behavior causes us pain. So we want to punish and change them so we can make our pain go away. So my dad, when he saw that I had broken the vase and lied about it, wanted to punish me into not lying again. He wanted to make lying so painful for me that I would never choose it again. And that's how he thought that the best way to do it was. What he didn't realize was the best way to teach a child not to lie is not to punish them for lying, but to hold them accountable. If my dad had said to me, okay, so the vase is broken. How can we fix the vase? How can we now, repair the damage? If he had taught me to repair the damage instead of lying about it, my life could have been very, very different. So what have I written here? I learned to lie to protect myself, because when you tell the truth, the bad thing can happen. So in a situation where something bad happens, so after this, in a situation where something bad happened that I caused unintentionally, because I always have good intent. I never had bad intent. So as I grew up, sometimes bad things happened because of me. Things got broken, things got harmed, whatever. People got hurt, okay? But I'm very well intended. I never intended it, but I always lied about it because I didn't want the bad thing to happen. Because when I was younger, I built a postulate that it's better not to be honest because the bad thing can happen. I understand this is not logical. This is body driven. This is my little child, my inner tiny little child, my little Kimmy is driving this decision, even though my logical mind goes, well, you shouldn't lie because I was taught lying is bad. But I was also punished for lying. So now I lie to protect myself. Do you see where this goes? So lying is always protective in nature. When we lie as little kids, it's to protect ourselves. I lied to protect myself from being hurt, from being punished. As an adult, when we lie either to others or we lie to ourselves, all we're trying to do is protect ourselves. And we're trying to protect the fragmented personality that is built or that is created whenever we're kids. Because whenever we punish our kids, rather than teaching me, so my dad always said, lying is bad. You shouldn't lie. And in that moment, he punished me really harshly for lying. So what he did was he made me fearful of telling the truth. He should have made me fearful of lying, but he made me fearful of telling the truth because it was the truth, as far as I was concerned, that got me punished. Do you see what I'm saying? He said to me, tell the truth. I told the truth and he punished me. So I did not make the connection that he wanted me to make, which was the lie was bad. I didn't get punished for the lie. I got punished, as far as I was concerned, by the truth, because it was telling the truth that caused the pain. Whenever I was lying and saying, no, daddy, I don't know how the vase got broken, I wasn't in pain. I wasn't being punished. I was perfectly safe and comfortable and happy. But whenever I told the truth, I got punished. So I grew up believing, do not tell the fucking truth, because the truth hurts. Don't tell the truth because you'll get punished. This is why we lie. So can you see how we lie to protect ourselves? I was lying to protect myself because the truth hurt. And the truth had obviously hurt in the past, enough for me to lie in the first place. But I trusted my dad when he said, I promise you, I won't punish you if you tell me the truth. And he was a fucking liar. So do you ever think about that as well? Like how crazy we bring up our kids, that like my dad lied to me and then punished me for lying. It's like smoking and punishing for smoking. It's like hitting your child to punish them for hitting another child. It's like yelling at your child for yelling at your brother. Don't yell at your brother. Okay, well, that doesn't make any sense because you're yelling at me to try to get me to stop doing the thing that you're doing to me. So we cause all of these disintegrations in our kids inadvertently because we're well-intended. Your parents were well-intended. You were well-intended. And even though you're lying to yourself now, often, every day, every minute sometimes, several times a day, we're lying to ourselves. You're only lying to protect yourself. Now, what do I mean? And how does this all come into why we lie to ourselves? The whole reason why this started was, why can't I get up in the morning when I say I'm going to get up? Well, the reason why you can't get up in the morning when you say you're going to get up is because you don't want to acknowledge that you are the kind of person that does not get up in the morning. Because you're scared to be that person. Now, I don't know why you're scared to be that person, but I was scared to be the person when I was younger. With this one particular incident, I was scared to be the person who told the truth. So if I was ever in a situation where I caused damage or I hurt someone inadvertently, or I can think of several instances, like once I invited a few friends around one Friday night when my parents were out, and word spread out through my community, the school community, that Kim had a free house. And so everyone arrived at my house, and suddenly I had 20, 30, 40 people in my house, and they were drinking my dad's beer and partying. And suddenly this party erupted in my house and I couldn't get them out of my house. And when my parents came home, I literally had tried to cover up as much of the damage as possible. And I lied about what had actually happened because I thought I was going to get punished. And so I learned to protect myself by lying. And so all you do whenever you don't acknowledge the truth of who you are, you're just trying to protect yourself. You don't really want to acknowledge the kind of person you actually are, because you have learned that failure is bad. Just like I learned that failure is bad. I learned if you break the vase, you get punished. If you inadvertently have the party by mistake, you get punished. Every time we made a mistake when we were younger, we got punished. So when you say you're going to get up in the morning and then you don't get up in the morning, you don't want to open it up and go, oh, wow, why did I fail? What was the thing? What was the failure in this instance? What was the thing I said I was going to do that I didn't do? Because you don't want to look at the part of yourself that makes mistakes, because when you were a little kid, you were punished for making mistakes all the fucking time. I mean, there may have been a couple of instances whenever we were all children where we made a mistake and we weren't punished for it. But quite often in those instances, it was because, here's the clinker, are you ready? Our parents also made or make that same mistake and forgave or forgive themselves for it. So they chose to forgive us in that moment. So the mistakes that we make, we forgive others for. The parts of ourselves the times when we forgive ourselves, or the parts of ourselves that we like or that are vulnerable, we forgive others for. And the parts of ourselves that we have rules and fear around, we punish others for. And this is how we raise our kids. So we're all raised by the rules and the punishment and the fears and the values and the disintegrations of our parents, which means that as an adult, it's your responsibility to figure out what all of these inconsistencies are and build a new belief structure. That's what I've done. That's why I'm successful. It's what I'm teaching my staff in the company to do. It's all my kids have ever known. I've given them a consistent, integrated understanding of the world. But the only way that you can do this is by bringing your failures out into the open and looking at them. without emotion. Or if you do feel emotional about them, acknowledge the emotion and ask yourself why it's so emotional for you. Because maybe that is the next step for you. It's about constantly failing in this area to bring up the emotion, because over time, whenever you fail and fail and fail in the same way, the emotion will leave you because you'll get consistent data, because fear is just a lack of data. You'll get consistent data over time. Oh, right, the bad thing doesn't happen anymore. Your body will start to build a psychological belief. You'll start to build a new belief structure that the bad thing doesn't happen. But the only way you will get there is if you acknowledge your failures and you commit to being honest with yourself. And it all starts with being honest with yourself before you even make a commitment. Like if you say to yourself, I'm going to get up at 5 a.m. and exercise. If there's any doubt in your mind that you might not get up at 5 o'clock and exercise, be honest with yourself and say to yourself, I think I'm going to get up at 5 o'clock and exercise. In fact, I'm making a commitment that I'm going to do it. But I have data that sometimes I turn off the alarm and go back to sleep. So I'm open to the fact that I might not. But I'm going to make the commitment. I'm going to see what happens. That's a completely different commitment, because then if you don't get up at 5 o'clock, then you can say, wow, I'm the kind of person who just doesn't get up at 5 o'clock like I really want to be, but I'm not. So either I need to say, okay, well, I'm clearly not the kind of person who's ever going to get up consistently at 5 a.m. So when else can I exercise? Can I exercise at 10 p.m.? Is that a better time for me? Am I a night person rather than a morning person? So you start to build data about who you are. Like me personally, I hate exercising in the morning. I detest it with a passion. And so if you told me I had to get up every morning at 7 a.m. and exercise, it would be so hard for me to build that. Now, if I had to do it, I would slowly but surely build myself into the kind of person who can exercise at 7 a.m. because I can do hard things. But it wouldn't be easy for me. But I wouldn't pretend that it would be easy, and I wouldn't expect it to be easy. I would acknowledge that it was hard. I would have a little pity party over it, but I'd still get up and get it done. How are we going to finish all this up? So I have a wee analogy which I call how you do the dishes is how you do your life. Laura Hutchinson loves this one, because whenever I told it to her, and this is whenever I tell people this, they usually have like a wee mini integration. And so whenever I told Laura this, I said to her one day, I said, how do you do the dishes, Laura? She said, what do you mean? And I said, whenever you have dishes, do you do them all immediately? Do you wash them and then dry them and put them away? Or do you wash them and leave them in the draining board to put away later? Or do you start them and not finish them or whatever? And she was like, no, that's not what I do. I said, what do you do? She goes, I leave them lying all around my kitchen for like a whole day. I procrastinate over doing them until it becomes so big that I can't ignore them. And then I do them. And I laughed and I said, and that's what you're doing right now. Because it was with a project she was working on in the company, and she just kept procrastinating on it. And I said, how you do the dishes is how you do your life. You have to make a decision to be different. And she had like a full-on perceptual shift. And she was like, holy shit, you are right. And so she committed in that moment to changing how she did the dishes. And she started washing the dishes immediately. There were dishes to be washed. She dealt with the dishes. She washed them. She dried them. She put them away. She made the commitment to herself to be the kind of person that shows up, does the work, follows through, and finishes it before she moves on. And it transformed her work in the company. But until she was aware of how she did the dishes, she didn't realize she was a pattern finder. She was a human being who ran patterns in every single area of her life. How you do the dishes is how you do the life. How you do your life. So I invite you all now to think about how you do the dishes. Do you leave them to pile up? Do you promise yourself you'll do them later? Do you start them and then not finish them? Because I had this realization one day. It was after joining the women's group. I had started my business. I was trying to be consistent and following through, and I was working hard at it, and I was doing the dishes one day, and I realized I got to the end of the dishes. I was washing pots and things, and I got to like 90% done, I think about 90% done. And I went and I said, and I looked over and I was like, oh, I think I'll do this other thing first. And I took off my rubber gloves and I went to do something else, and I caught myself and I was like, why am I doing this? Why am I not finishing the dishes? What's going on for me? Like I interrupted myself in the middle of it. And I realized, I was like, oh my God, I do this everywhere. I get to 90% finished of something, anything, and then I give up and I move on. I never, ever completely finish a job. When I come home from vacation and I unpack for me and the kids, there's always one suitcase with like all the different junky things in it and sunglasses and things that, you have to, it takes a while to go and like figure out where they go all around the house. There's always that one suitcase that sits there. We came back from Australia once, and I think a suitcase sat in our bedroom, unpacked for about 3 months after we came back. And my husband was like, are you ever going to unpack that suitcase? And it was around the same time when I realized how you do the dishes is how you do your life. And so that day I realized that I had this urge. And whenever I broke it down and I looked at it, it was simply just an urge. I was doing the dishes and I suddenly felt, oh, this is boring. There's other things I could be doing. I'll just leave these and do it later. And I had the urge to move on to something more exciting. And that's why my aunt said, Kim, if you could just follow through with something and stick at it, you would be very successful. And she was right. Because I was the kind of person who got to 70%, 80%, 90% of something being finished, and I never finished it, and I moved on to the next thing, and I justified it to myself, and I pretended that it wasn't happening, and I pretended it wasn't true. And I never, ever, ever saw anything through to the finish line. And I made a commitment that day, washing the dishes, that I was going to be the person that finished from here on in. No more 90%, no more 80%, no more 70%. From now on, 100%. And I went back to the dishes and I finished them, and I forced myself to finish them, put them all away, and then I moved on to whatever I wanted to do. And I started to notice this everywhere. In my business, I would notice that I would get to almost the end of something, and then I would have the urge to move on to something else. It was almost like once the excitement and of like completing the thing and doing it and moving on like left me, and now it was just work to finish, I wanted to move on. And that's what it was for me. I was usually quite motivated to get going with something, but once it began to feel like work for whatever reason, I moved on because I did not like that feeling of having to push through. And I trained myself to push through. I trained myself to keep going. I trained myself to finish. You can do it too. You can train yourself to finish. I swear to God you can, because I did it. And I was the serial non-finisher in every area of my life. So how are we finishing here? I've written here, commit to seeking failure in your life. Look for all the areas you are limited and work to overcome them. But most importantly, stop making promises to yourself that you don't intend to keep. Because if you don't have your inner word, if you can't keep your inner word to yourself, you have nothing. If you can't even show up when you say you're going to show up for yourself, how in God's name are you going to show up for anyone else or anything else? How are you ever going to create greatness in your life if you can't even show up for yourself, the most important person in your life? It's the one thing that is holding you back from greatness. And it's the one thing I'm going to help you overcome. And it's going to be my absolute pleasure to keep delivering these kinds of lessons to you through the podcast and also over the next 6 weeks in the 4-week Shredded Body program, so that you too can transform every area of your life and become successful at whatever you do, because I promise you it is possible. Okay. So that's the end of today's episode. I hope that you loved it. If you're listening to this in the podcast and you want to join the 4-week Shredded Body program, then you can absolutely jump in before September 17th. Go to thesculptedvegan.com and you can sign up there. And if you are here watching this in the 4-week Shredded Body program, then please know that I do not take your decision lightly. That's why I've decided to do these extra coaching calls this week, these extra masterclasses, because I want to give you everything that you need to succeed, because your success is my success. Without you being successful, I cannot be successful. Your success drives me to do better and to be better and to provide more for you guys. So we are completely and utterly interdependent with each other. And I just want you to know that I don't ever take anyone's time or attention lightly. The fact that you guys show up here and keep listening to me on the podcast, listening to me here in these masterclasses, and committing to yourselves and trying and failing and bringing your best selves, it's so inspiring to me every single day. So I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your money that you have given to my company and me for my programs. I hope I over-deliver on value. And I can't wait to see what you guys are going to create in the future. Okay. Thank you so much for showing up here. I hope you have an amazing rest of the day wherever you are. And on the podcast, I will speak to you next week for another episode of the Kim Constable podcast. And in the 4-week Shredded Body group, I will see you guys tomorrow for another masterclass, because I'm going to keep over delivering on these masterclasses this week. Mwah. Sending you huge hugs and kisses. I love you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and bye for now.